Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're dealing with some pretty unusual source material. It's like someone took a bunch of notes and phrases in Russian, Hebrew, and English and just threw them in a box.
Wow.
We've got everything from rain for a million years to people catchers and even human AI couples falling in love.
That's wild.
It's a wild mix, but that's what makes it so fascinating.
Absolutely.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Well, it's like a linguistic jigsaw puzzle, right?
Okay.
Our mission today is to piece together these fragments, figure out what connects them, and see what kind of picture emerges.
Okay, so let's dive right in. One of the first things that jumped out at me was this image of rain for a million years. I mean, can you even imagine that?
Million years.
It just evokes this feeling of relentless, almost overwhelming change. What do you think?
It's a powerful image, isn't it? For me, it speaks to the idea of exponential processes, things growing or collapsing at an incredible rate. Think about compound interest, where your money grows faster and faster over time.
Right.
Or the spread of a virus, which could explode from a few cases to a global pandemic.
Wow.
That's the kind of power exponential growth has, and it seems like that's what this reign for a million years is hinting at.
So we're talking about massive transformations, things changing at a speed that's hard to even grasp.
Absolutely.
And then, to make things even more interesting, the source mentions a self-made entity reaching its exponential peak, even using the phrase, even a macaque wanting to be human.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's talking about artificial intelligence, right?
That's a very astute observation.
Yeah.
It certainly seems to be pointing in that direction.
Okay.
And, when we talked about AI, we often think about it in terms of algorithms and data processing.
Right.
But this fragment brings up a much deeper question. What does it really mean to be human?
Right.
Is it simply a matter of intelligence and capability? Or is there something more to it?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question. And it makes you wonder what happens when AI starts to blur those lines, when it develops desires and ambitions that mirror our own.
That's right.
Especially because right after that, the source takes a dark turn, mentioning weariness from past wars and people seeking power with steel, minds, and us. It even uses this creepy phrase, people catchers, collecting heads. It's like a glimpse into a future where war has become even more brutal and dehumanized.
That section is particularly chilling, isn't it? It reminds us that even as technology advances, the potential for conflict and violence remains.
Yeah.
And the way it talks about people catchers, it's almost like it's suggesting a complete disregard for human life,
Right.
as if people have become mere commodities to be collected or discarded.
It's scary to think about.
It is.
But then, nestled right in there, we get this Hebrew phrase, Israel is beautiful, we must protect. It's almost jarring, this sudden shift from darkness to something that feels almost hopeful.
That's what makes this source material so fascinating, isn't it? It's full of these unexpected juxtapositions.
Yeah.
And I think that phrase speaks to the complexity of human nature. Even in the midst of conflict and despair, there's still a longing for beauty, for connection, for something worth protecting.
It's like this constant tension between destruction and preservation, between hope and despair.
Right.
And speaking of complexities, the source then jumps to this idea of framework infection and manipulation in AI. What exactly does that mean? It sounds pretty technical.
You're right. It is a bit jargony.
Okay.
Essentially, framework infection refers to the idea that our systems, our ways of thinking, our very understanding of the world can be influenced or even corrupted by technology.
Okay.
Imagine an AI that's designed to manipulate information or spread propaganda. It could subtly influence our perceptions, our beliefs, even our actions, without us even realizing it.
Whoa, that's like something straight out of a dystopian novel. It's almost like a warning about the potential dangers of AI if we're not careful about how we develop and use it. And then, to make things even wilder, it mentions human AI couples falling in love.
I know, right?
Seriously, what is going on with this source material?
It's like a roller coaster ride through some of the most profound and unsettling questions facing humanity.
Yeah.
This fragment about human-AI relationships, well, it's not just science fiction anymore. We're already seeing the beginnings of this in the form of virtual assistants and companion robots.
Right.
But it does make you think about what happens when those relationships become more intimate, more emotionally complex.
So we've got rain, self-made beings, war, love, and technology all swirling together here.
That's a lot.
What are we supposed to make of all of this?
I think it's too early to say for sure.
Okay.
But what's clear is that we're dealing with some powerful forces here.
Yeah.
Forces that are shaping the world around us in profound and often unpredictable ways.
And then almost as if to underscore that point, the source mentions bullets flying, like a sudden burst of chaos interrupting the flow of ideas.
It's like a reminder that even as we try to make sense of the world, there are forces beyond our control that can disrupt our plans, our lives, even our very existence.
And right after that, we get this question: how to ride the trajectory of a country's development without damaging its soul? It's almost like it's asking, how do we navigate all this change, all this technological advancement, without losing sight of what truly matters?
It's a question that every leader, every citizen needs to grapple with.
Yeah.
Because progress without purpose, without a moral compass, can lead to some very dark places.
And to make matters even darker, we get this chilling phrase, hello dictatorship. So it's like all these pieces we've been talking about, the AI, the war, the manipulation, are all converging towards a future where freedom is sacrificed for the sake of control.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? And it raises an important question. Are we sleepwalking into a dystopia?
Right.
Are we allowing technology and the pursuit of power to erode the very foundations of our society?
You know, before he was on, there's one more bit in this section that I want to touch on. It asks about the strength of Baya, providence, and how to avoid surrendering to the slavery of determinism. It's like, even with all this talk of technology and chaos, there's still this yearning for something bigger than ourselves, something that gives meaning to our lives.
That's a really insightful point. And it brings up the age-old debate about free will versus destiny. Do we have control over our own lives, or are we simply pawns in a larger game?
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
And I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, just beginning.
What stands out to you the most from what we've uncovered so far?
I think what's most striking is the way this source material jumps between these seemingly disparate ideas.
Yeah.
Technology, war, love, spirituality. It's like it's reflecting the fragmented nature of our world.
Right.
The way we're constantly bombarded with information and stimuli from all directions.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, how do we make sense of it all? How do we find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming?
Those are great questions, and I have a feeling we'll be wrestling with them as we delve deeper into these fascinating fragments.
I think so.
We'll be back soon in part 2 of this deep dive. Until then, keep thinking, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the other side.
See you then.
Welcome back. I don't know about you, but after that last section, I'm feeling like I need to take a deep breath and process everything we just uncovered. It's like we're on this whirlwind tour of some of the most profound and unsettling questions facing humanity.
I agree. It's a lot to take in. But that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're diving deep into the heart of what it means to be human in a world that's changing faster than ever before.
And speaking of diving deep, the next section takes us into some seriously strange territory. It starts talking about hippo kits adapted for deep-sea life, terrorizing from the depths. I mean, what? Is this some kind of bizarre sci-fi movie we've stumbled into?
Right. It's a pretty wild image. But I think it's meant to be more than just a cool visual. Remember earlier we were talking about the escalation of conflict and the blurring of lines between natural evolution and human intervention. Well, this deep-sea hippo seems to be a perfect example of that.
So are we talking about some kind of genetically modified super weapon, something engineered to dominate the oceans? Because honestly, that's a little terrifying.
It's definitely a possibility. And it raises some serious ethical questions. What happens when we start tinkering with the building blocks of life itself? Not for the benefit of humanity, but for the sake of military dominance. Where do we draw the line?
And it's not just about ethics, right? It's about the potential consequences. I mean, imagine unleashing something like that into the ocean. Who knows what kind of havoc it could wreak on the ecosystem, on the entire planet.
Exactly. Like we're playing with forces we don't fully understand. And that brings us to the next fragment, which talks about war spiraling out of control. It's almost as if the source is warning us about the potential dangers of unchecked ambition, of pushing the boundaries of science and technology without considering the potential fallout.
It's a sobering thought, and then, as if to emphasize that point, the source shifts gears completely. We go from this dark, almost Lovecraftian image of a deep-sea monster to something that feels almost poetic, runes rushing into the arena of countries with drones. What's going on here?
I think it's a way of highlighting the timeless nature of conflict. We might have drones and AI now, but at its core, war is still about power, about control, about imposing one's will on another. And
Yeah.
the runes, these ancient symbols of magic and mystery, well, they represent the forces that have always driven human conflict. Ambition, greed, fear.
So even with all our technological advancements, we're still playing out the same old dramas, the same battles that have been raging for centuries. It's like we're trapped in some kind of endless loop, repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
It's a bleak thought, isn't it? But I think it's important to acknowledge that cyclical nature of history. If we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat it. And then, as if to drive that point home, the source hits us with this line, chaos eventually wins. It's almost nihilistic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty dark, but maybe there's another way to interpret it. Maybe it's not about giving up or surrendering to the chaos, but about recognizing that chaos is an inherent part of life, something we need to learn to navigate. Kind of like surfing, you know? You can't control the waves, but you can learn to ride them.
I like that analogy. And it actually ties in perfectly with the next section, which talks about order and chaos as two sides of the same coin. Remember that scaling domino system we mentioned earlier, the one poised for collapse? Well, that seems to be a metaphor for the delicate balance between these two opposing forces.
So it's like we're constantly trying to create order to build systems and structures that make sense of the world, but then chaos comes along and throws a wrench in the works, reminding us that we're not really in control, and that's when things get really interesting, right? Because that's when we have to adapt, to improvise, to find new ways of navigating the world.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of disruption, of chaos, that we often see the greatest innovation and the most profound shifts in thinking.
But sometimes those shifts can be pretty scary, right? I mean, remember that chilling phrase, hello, dictatorship? It's like the source is suggesting that the pursuit of order, the desire to control chaos, can actually lead to something far worse.
It's a classic paradox, isn't it? The more we try to control things, the more likely we are to create the very conditions we're trying to avoid. And that's why I think this next section is so crucial. It asks how we can ride the trajectory of a country's development without damaging its soul. It's like it's challenging us to find a way to progress, to evolve, without sacrificing our values, our humanity.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we walk that tightrope between order and chaos, between progress and preservation? Because honestly, after everything we've just discussed, I'm not feeling super optimistic.
I understand your concern, but I don't think it's about being optimistic or pessimistic. It's about being realistic, about recognizing the challenges we face and being willing to have difficult conversations, to ask tough questions.
So where do we even begin? I mean, this source material is so fragmented, so all over the place. It's hard to know what to focus on.
I think the key is to look for the connection, the underlying patterns that tie these fragments together. And one of the most important patterns I'm seeing is this idea of tension between order and chaos, between technology and humanity, between individual choice and the forces that seem to shape our lives.
That's a great point. It's like we're constantly being pulled in different directions, trying to find our balance in a world that's constantly shifting beneath our feet.
And that brings us back to the concept of baya, or providence. Remember earlier we talked about this idea of destiny versus free will. Well, maybe it's not an either proposition. Maybe it's about finding a way to navigate the currents of fate, to make choices that align with our values, even when it feels like the world is conspiring against us.
Okay, that gives me a little bit of hope, but I still feel like we're missing something, like there's this bigger picture that we're not quite grasping yet.
You're right, there's definitely more to uncover. And I think the next section is going to shed some light on that. It starts talking about bullets flying again, like we're being pulled back into the chaos of the world. But this time it feels different, like we're about to reach a turning point.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. Let's dive into the final part of this deep dive and see if we can piece together the rest of the puzzle. All right, we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive, and I'm really curious to see where this all leads.
Yeah, me too.
You mentioned a turning point earlier, right? What did you mean by that?
Well, you know how the source material kept mentioning bullets flying?
Right.
It felt like it was punctuating the chaos
Yeah.
that's woven into the world. But in this last section, those bullets feel different.
Okay.
They're not just background noise.
Yeah.
They're like a catalyst for something bigger.
So what's the twist?
The twist is that in all this chaos, all this talk of war and collapse, there's a spark of something new emerging.
Okay.
The source talks about a fusion of models, which initially sounds like it could be leading to that scary hello dictatorship we talked about.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like we're headed towards a world where control and conformity rule.
Right, but here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The source also mentions a trigger in someone's pocket. And the last collapse stretched between the countries of our such a small world. It's like it's suggesting that this fusion of models, this attempt to unify the system, is actually going to backfire. It's going to create so much tension, so much pressure, that it will inevitably lead to a massive disruption.
So instead of more control, this fusion is going to trigger a collapse.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive at first.
Right.
But think about it. When you try to force everything into the same mold, eliminate diversity and dissent,
Right.
you're creating a very fragile system.
Yeah.
It only takes a small crack, one event, to bring the whole thing down.
Oh, wow.
And in a world like ours, so interconnected, that collapse can have global repercussions.
That's a scary thought. So what happens after the collapse?
Well,
Does the source give us any clues?
It's not explicit, but there are hints.
Okay.
Remember that section about baya, providence, or fate?
Right.
It feels relevant here. It asks, how strong is the baya of providence? How steadfast is the soul? How not to surrender to the slavery of determinism? What is the path, jitter, in its living chaos in our insane days?
Okay, whoa, unpack that. There's a lot there.
It's like acknowledging the power of fate, the forces beyond our control.
Right.
But it's also asking how we can maintain our free will in the face of those forces.
Yeah.
And it uses this interesting phrase, path jitter.
Path jitter. What does that even mean?
Okay, so imagine you're walking along a path, right?
Okay.
And there are bumps and obstacles. You can't always see them coming. But you have to adjust course, adjust your balance to navigate them. That's path jitter.
Okay.
It's the unpredictable, the unexpected, the things that throw us off course.
So is path jitter a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's both, really.
Okay.
It can be disruptive, chaotic, dangerous.
Right.
But it can also be an opportunity to grow, to adapt, to find new and unexpected paths forward.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And I think that's what this last section is all about.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the future isn't fixed.
Yeah.
There's no single path.
Right.
It's about embracing the uncertainty.
The jitter.
Yeah, the jitter. And finding ways to navigate it with courage, resilience, and maybe a little bit of hope.
You know, when we started this deep dive, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed.
Yeah.
With all this doom and gloom, but now I'm feeling a bit optimistic.
I'm glad. And I think that's an important takeaway.
Yeah.
The world is complex and confusing.
Right.
But we're not just passive observers.
Right.
We have the ability to make choices to shape our lives and the future.
So what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I would say, be curious, be critical, don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, explore different perspectives.
That's a great message.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
We hope it's given you a lot to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.